Hey there, sweetheart. You got a minute? I don't usually tell this story, but I think it's time. My name is Eleanor May Whitlock. I'm 81 years old, and I've lived in the same white-painted house on the edge of Dutch Hollow, Pennsylvania, since 1954. The porch swings a little crooked now, like my back, but the memories? They still sit straight in my mind, especially this one. Please, if this touches you, leave a like, a comment, or even just a heart, and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. I think some stories deserve to be remembered, don't you? It was June 18th, 1961. The air smelled like wild honeysuckle and rain-wet gravel. I was 22 and in love, or so I thought. His name was Thomas Avery, the preacher's son. He had eyes like polished walnuts and a voice that could hush a storm. The kind of man the church ladies whispered about while pretending not to stare. We were set to marry at First Baptist just off Main Street, next to the apple orchard. Mama had sewn my dress with hands that trembled from arthritis, but love-stitched every inch of lace. Daddy, he'd practiced walking me down the aisle every night that week, holding my elbow like I was made of spun glass. We had roast chicken waiting in the church basement, lemonade in glass jugs sweating in the sun. My little sister Annie tied white ribbons to the trees out front. And the whole town came. Mrs. Dalloway brought her pecan pie. Pastor Graham had polished his Bible cover just for the occasion. But Thomas never came. I stood in that drafty church with my veil slipping sideways, my hands shaking like they were full of bees. Pastor Graham tapped his watch. Mama whispered a prayer. Daddy clenched his jaw so tight his teeth cracked. And then someone ran in, said they'd found Thomas's car by the bridge, doors wide open, engine off. No note. No goodbye. Just gone. That's when my heart cracked in a way no stethoscope could hear. The silence in that church screamed louder than any thunderstorm. I spent the next 6 months in bed, wrapped in my mama's old quilts, drinking chamomile like it could undo the shame. Folks stopped visiting. I became that girl who got left at the altar. I could still hear their whispers through the walls. Maybe he found out she wasn't good enough. She must have done something to scare him off. The town that once loved me now looked through me. Mama tried to coax me back with warm biscuits and hymns, but nothing tasted right. Nothing felt right. And then, one night in the dead of February, I found his journal in the bottom of my cedar chest. I didn't even know I'd kept it. Pages filled with words he never said to me. Scribbles about dark thoughts. The pressure from his father. "You must be perfect, Thomas," was too much. There were drawings, disturbing ones. A boy in the woods with hollow eyes. A church with flames. I didn't understand it fully then, but now, looking back, I think he was drowning long before our wedding day. But I wasn't given the luxury of understanding. I was left with whispers, judgment, and a belly full of silence. I tried to move on. I became a teacher. I taught first grade for 32 years. Children were my healing balm. Their laughter softened the ache, but never erased it. I never married. Couldn't bear to let anyone that close again. Then, 27 years later, in the spring of 1988, a letter arrived. A pale blue envelope, edges curled, with a return address stamped, St. Elmo's Psychiatric Hospital, Allegheny County. My hands trembled. I thought it was a mistake. Or maybe someone playing cruel. But inside was a letter from Thomas. "Yes, Thomas," it began. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, I hope you're still alive. I've been in here longer than I was ever free. They say I can write 1 letter a year. I saved mine for you." He said he'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia. That he'd been hearing voices, seeing things that weren't there even before we got engaged. He was terrified on our wedding day, convinced that if we married, he'd hurt me. He ran to protect me. He thought he was saving my life. He wasn't hiding from me. He was hiding from himself. And suddenly, decades of grief turned into a knot of something new. Confusion, forgiveness, sorrow tangled like a fishing line. I wept for the young man who couldn't ask for help. I wept for the girl I was, left without answers. And I wept for the years lost in between, all because no one talked about mental illness in those days. You were just strange or troubled or weak. Thomas wrote to me once a year after that, until 1995. His last letter came just before Christmas. He said he was tired, that the medicine dulled his dreams, but he no longer screamed in his sleep. He said he watched the birds outside his window every morning and thought of me in a white dress. Then nothing. I never heard from him again. And I don't know if he's still alive. I don't even know if he made it past New Year's. But I keep every letter in a box beneath my bed. Some nights, when the wind howls through these hills and I feel the ache in my bones, I take them out, run my fingers over the ink, and whisper, "I forgive you, Tom." Because that's the thing about sorrow. My dear, it never really leaves. It just folds itself into the cracks of your life like old roots, quiet, unseen, but always there. So, why am I telling you this now? Because maybe you're holding on to something too. Maybe someone hurt you and never came back to say why. Maybe you're carrying questions that'll never be answered. And I want you to know you can survive that.
You can teach children.
You can grow old on a crooked porch. You can laugh again, even with a broken heart. Please, if you've ever been abandoned, forgotten, or misunderstood, leave a comment. Let's not carry this pain alone anymore. Maybe your story can help someone else's healing too. And subscribe, darling. I've got more stories. And the one I'm about to tell you? Well, 3 months ago, I got a phone call from a woman who claimed to be Thomas's daughter. She said she needed to meet me, that her father left behind something meant only for me. And what she gave me changed everything I thought I knew. Now, let me tell you what happened next. It was late March. The snow was just beginning to melt off the hills behind my house, leaving behind little rivers of brown slush. I'd just come back from the corner store with a loaf of rye and a can of peaches when my phone rang.
I still use a landline.
The kind with the coiled cord and the rotary dial. And that phone hardly ever rings anymore unless it's a political survey or someone trying to sell me solar panels. But this time it wasn't that. It was a woman's voice. Shaky, like she'd rehearsed this call 100 times. "Hi, is this Eleanor Whitlock?" I hesitated. "Yes." There was a pause. "My name is Marissa. I'm Thomas Avery's daughter." My knees buckled. I sat down on the hallway bench, the one Thomas helped build with my daddy in the summer of '59. "I know this is a shock," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he talked about you. A lot. And I think you deserve to know everything. Would you be willing to meet?" 3 days later, she drove all the way from Erie to Dutch Hollow in a little silver Subaru. She looked nothing like Thomas, and yet everything like him. Tall, solemn, with those same deep walnut eyes that pulled you in and never quite let you go. She stepped out holding a small wooden box, about the size of a bread loaf, polished, with a tiny gold latch on the front. I could smell cedar and something older, like time itself, lived in that wood. We sat on my porch. She didn't say much at first, just kept looking at the hills and the trees like she needed nature to calm her nerves. Then she placed the box on my lap and said, "He left this for you. He said it belonged to both of you even though you never got to share it." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 2 things. A bundle of dried lavender, bound in a silk ribbon the color of lilacs, and a stack of letters. Not the ones he'd sent me from the hospital. These were older. Some yellowed at the edges. Some written in ink so faded it looked like whispers on paper. Each envelope was marked with a number and the words "never sent." I opened the first one. Dated July 3rd, 1961, barely 2 weeks after our wedding day that wasn't. The ink bled in places, like his hand had shaken. He wrote about the bridge, about leaving the car behind, about watching the church from the woods behind the orchard, afraid to come closer. He saw me crying on the steps, he said.
He wanted to run to me.
But he thought his mind was cursed, that marrying me would doom me to a life with a man who saw shadows where there were none. The second letter spoke of nightmares. The third of voices. Of things he couldn't explain, but felt with every bone in his body. He wrote like he was drowning, and the only air he found was when he wrote my name. I sat there, tears soaking the paper, as Marissa reached into her coat and pulled out a photograph. It was of Thomas. Not the boy I remembered, but an older man, mid-40s maybe, sitting on a bench in a hospital courtyard, looking out into the distance with a calm expression.
He was holding something.
It was my wedding photo. The one that never should have existed. The one Annie snapped me before I walked into the church. He'd kept it all those years. But what Marissa said next is what truly knocked the wind from me. She leaned in, voice barely audible. My father died in 1996. But before he passed, he confessed something strange, something the doctors dismissed as delusion. I looked at her, confused. He said there was another reason he left that day. Something no one would believe. She reached into her purse and pulled out an old cassette tape. One of the nurses, an older gentleman who worked there for decades, recorded conversations with patients for therapy use. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. And this is my father. The day before he died. I took the tape and held it in my hands. It felt heavier than it should have. Like it was carrying a truth I hadn't asked for, but maybe always feared. I haven't listened to it, Marissa said, standing up. I couldn't. I thought maybe it should be you. And then she left. Just like that. She drove off into the misty road, leaving me with a box full of unsent love and a cassette whispering with ghosts. Now here's the thing, sweetheart. I haven't played that tape. Not yet. Because what if what's on it changes everything? What if it's not just mental illness? What if he saw something? What if it wasn't just voices? What if the real reason Thomas left that day was because someone or something warned him? And what if that same thing is still watching me now? Now listen close, baby. Because I did it. I finally played the tape. I waited until midnight. Something about that hour felt right. Quiet. Sacred. Like the whole world was holding its breath just for me. I pulled out Daddy's old cassette player from the attic, dusted it off, wiped away the cobwebs, prayed it still worked. The plastic was yellowed, but when I pressed play, the reels started turning with a faint hum and a click like a heartbeat coming back to life. Then, silence. And then, Thomas's voice. Older.
Softer.
But still him. Test, they say this helps. I don't know if it does. But I need to say it out loud. Just once before I go. My breath caught. I pressed the speaker closer to my chest like it was a lifeline. I've told them I hear voices. That I see things that aren't there. But that's not the truth. Not all of it.
He paused.
They started after I saw the man. My whole body tensed. I was 13. It was after church on a Sunday. I snuck away from the picnic near the orchard. I just wanted quiet. I sat under that old twisted tree, the one near the creek bed. His voice dropped to a whisper. And that's when I saw him. Standing still as stone. Wearing a preacher's robe that didn't belong to any church I knew. His face was pale but not white. Ashen. And his eyes. Eleanor, they were like burned-out coals. Dead but watching. He paused again. He said, "You're not meant to marry. If you do, you'll bury her before the first frost." My hands went numb. Thomas continued, shakier now. I tried to run. But every few years he came back. Always watching. Sometimes in the woods. Sometimes in my dreams. But always with that same warning. Then his voice cracked, full of something between fear and heartbreak. I saw him the night before the wedding. He was standing outside the window of the church basement. Same robe. Same dead eyes. I swear, Eleanor, the wind stopped. The lights flickered. And he whispered, "Don't do it. Or you'll kill her." He took a breath, shaky, uneven. That's why I left. Not because I didn't love you, but because I did. I thought I was saving your life. Then a long silence. And finally, he said something I'll never forget. If this is madness, then may God forgive me. But if it wasn't, if it was real, then you were never safe. And maybe you still aren't. The tape clicked. That was it. Nothing more. I sat there in the dark, the cassette whirring like a ghost whispering behind my ear. The old clock on the wall ticked like thunder. And that's when I heard it. A knock. On my front door. I froze. It was 1:17 a.m. Nobody knocks at that hour. My porch light was off. No footsteps, no engine. Just one knock. Firm. Deliberate. Then another. I peeked through the curtain. And I swear, sweetheart, I swear on my mother's grave, there was a figure. Standing on my porch.
Tall.
Still. Wearing a dark robe. Not moving. Not saying a word. I backed away from the window, heart pounding in my ears like war drums. I called the sheriff's station, but the line was dead. Completely cut off. And then, before I could blink, the knocking stopped. I looked again. The porch was empty. Not a soul. But the strangest thing? There were muddy footprints on the wooden steps. Heading in. Not away. And I haven't seen them since. But the next morning, I found something even worse. Something placed on my porch swing, wrapped in white lace, smelling faintly of lavender. It was my wedding veil. The same one I wore in 1961. The same one that vanished after the wedding was called off. It was clean,
Pressed.
and tied with a note. Just 2 words. Not over. Sweetheart, I don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm losing my mind like Thomas feared he did, or if something darker is unfolding. But if you believe me, please comment.
Please subscribe.
I need you to help me figure this out. Because I just got a call from Marissa again. She says she's been followed. And she found something in her father's journal that no one was ever meant to see. Something that leads straight back to me. Now let me tell you what happened after that veil showed up on my porch.
I didn't sleep that night.
I sat at the kitchen table with every light on, holding the lace like it might dissolve in my hands. I kept whispering, "It's not real. It's not real."
But it was.
I could feel the old stitching Mama did with her arthritic fingers. I could smell the lavender sachet she tucked into the folds. The veil was real, and so was the note that came with it. Not over. I was about to call the police again when my phone rang. This time it worked. It was Marissa. And her voice, oh Lord, her voice was terrified. "I need to see you," she said.
Now.
"I found something in my father's journal.
A code.
And I think I cracked it." She drove down the next morning. When I opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her hands were shaking as she clutched a battered leather journal. One I hadn't seen before. "This isn't the one I brought last time," she said. "I found it hidden behind a false panel in his closet. It was locked. I had to pry it open with a screwdriver." She laid it on the table between us and opened to a page filled with strange symbols, scribbled over and over. Circles, crosses, Roman numerals. But it wasn't random. It was a pattern. And underneath it, scrawled in pencil, "Back of the orchard. 13 steps. Under the one that never bloomed." My skin prickled. "You think it's a grave?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Marissa nodded. "Or something buried. Something he didn't want anyone to find." We didn't tell anyone. We didn't call the sheriff. We didn't want to be dismissed or laughed at. And deep down, I think we both knew this wasn't something the law could help with. So that evening, just before dusk, we drove out to the old orchard behind First Baptist. It hadn't been used in decades. The grass was tall, golden with age. The trees stood like old soldiers, crooked and brittle. Most still bore fruit, even if worm-bitten and wild. But we found it. The tree that never bloomed. It looked wrong. No bark. No birds. Its limbs were twisted toward the ground like it had tried to dig itself under. Marissa measured 13 steps from the base. We marked the spot with a rock. Then she handed me the shovel. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. She nodded. "I think we need to."
I think he wanted us to.
We dug. The dirt was dry, stubborn. Each scoop echoed in the silence like a drumbeat. After about an hour, my shovel hit something solid. Not wood, not stone. Metal. A box.
Small.
Rusted. Locked with a latch. Marissa wiped it clean and opened it slowly. Inside was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She peeled it back. There were photographs. Old black and whites. But not of Thomas. They were of me. Me from the late 50s and early 60s, photographed from a distance. One of me was walking to school. One of me was buying fabric at Harper's General Store. One of me sitting on my porch swing reading. All taken without my knowledge. All labeled with the same two words on the back. Protect her. My breath caught. And then we found the newspaper clippings. Small articles, yellowed with age. Girls gone missing. All within 100 miles of Dutch Hollow. All brides-to-be. All disappeared within weeks of their wedding day. One girl looked eerily like me. I think Thomas knew something, Marissa whispered. Or someone. I nodded, heart pounding. Then she pulled out the last item in the box. A small, black leather Bible. Inside, tucked in the back cover, was a note in Thomas's handwriting. He's still out there. He never stopped. And he was never imaginary. I only saw the man in the robe when he was near. I dropped the Bible, because at that moment, I remembered something. The day before the wedding, when I was in the church basement adjusting my dress in the mirror, I saw someone through the window. Not clearly, just a shadow.
Tall.
Still, like a statue in robes. I told myself it was nerves. But now I wonder, was he watching me, too? Sweetheart, I know how this sounds. I know I must sound like a scared old woman chasing ghosts. But I felt something that night. Something watching from the woods. And now I'm starting to think Thomas didn't run because he was broken. He ran because he was being hunted. And he thought I was next. But here's the part that chilled me to my bones. Later that night, after Marissa left, I went to return the Bible to the box. And I found something I knew wasn't there before. Another photo.
New.
Color.
Of me.
Taken last night through my kitchen window.
Please. Subscribe.
Leave a comment. Share this if you believe me. Now listen closely. After I found the photo of myself, the new one, taken through my kitchen window, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over the black leather Bible Thomas had hidden in that rusted box, praying it held more answers than fear. And that's when I felt it. A ridge, near the inner spine of the cover. It wasn't part of the binding. It was a slit, very small, carefully sewn shut. I took Mama's old sewing scissors, snipped the edge, and slid out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and nearly crumbling. There were 3 things written on it. 1. Reverend Thomas Vale. 2. Widow's Hollow Cabin. 3. October 13th, 2025. I sat there, my old heart pounding like a kettle drum. That was today's date. October 13th. I turned to look at the clock. 4:02 p.m. Beneath the writing, in faint ink, were 2 more words. Go alone. Now listen. I should have called someone. The police. A neighbor. Marissa. But I didn't. Because deep in my bones, something told me this was the moment. The moment Thomas had spent decades trying to prepare me for. And if I didn't face it, it would never stop. I packed a flashlight, my rosary, a small knife I kept in the kitchen drawer, and a photo of Thomas from 1960, just in case this really was about him. Widow's Hollow was a strip of land just past the old cemetery outside Dutch Hollow. A few cabins had been built there back in the 1920s by coal workers. Most were rotting now, taken back by trees and time. But I remembered one in particular. One folks said was cursed. They called it the Listening House. Said if you stepped on the porch, you could hear whispers in the walls. That's where I went. It was nearly sunset when I reached it. The wind had picked up, and the trees moaned like they remembered too much. The cabin stood hunched, buried in vines and silence. One shutter dangled by a single nail. The front door was shut but not locked. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, dust, rot, and something older like mildew and blood. Inside, the air was heavy.
Still.
The wallpaper was peeling, and the wooden floor creaked with every breath. But on the far wall, there was writing. Dozens of names. All brides. All with dates scratched out beside them. Some names were familiar, from the clippings we found. Missing women. Never found. And then near the bottom, Eleanor Whitlock, June 18, 1961. But instead of a scratched-out date, there was a single word beneath mine. Spared. And next to it, written in red. But she remembers. My knees gave way, and I dropped to the floor, sobbing. Because suddenly it all made a twisted kind of sense. Thomas hadn't run from me. He hadn't even run from his mind. He ran from this place. From whoever wrote that list. From whoever was choosing those women. And then I heard it. A creak from the back of the cabin. Someone else was here. I grabbed my flashlight and turned toward the sound, whispering a prayer. The back door stood ajar. Beyond it, down the hill, I saw a figure moving through the trees, slow, deliberate, almost like it wanted me to follow. So I did. I followed it down a winding trail choked with roots and mud, until it disappeared at the base of a dried-up well. And beside that well was a headstone.
New.
Freshly carved. No moss. No vines. Just one name. Reverend Thomas Vale. 1935 to 1996. He warned them. They didn't listen. My blood ran cold. Because that was the name written on the paper in the Bible. Thomas Vale. But it wasn't my Thomas. It was someone older. A preacher from the 1950s. I remembered hearing about him in whispers, excommunicated for preaching visions, fire, and blood. Rumor was, he vanished into the woods and started a watchman ministry no church ever claimed. And now he was buried here, next to the old well, the one the children called the wishing mouth. I dropped to my knees, and that's when I saw it, tucked behind the headstone, almost buried in the leaves. A Polaroid camera, and a stack of photos rubber-banded together. I untied them slowly. Each photo was recent, taken over the past 2 months. All of them were of me, at the market, on the porch, in my nightgown, through the bedroom window. And the last photo, it was of me standing at this very grave, holding those very photos. The timestamp? 4:17 p.m. October 13th, 2025. It was 4:14 when I looked up and heard footsteps behind me. Please, darling, if you're still with me, leave a comment.
Tell me what you think this is.
I can't explain it. I can barely breathe. And I'm scared of what I'll see when I turn around. Because I know someone is watching. So, there I was, standing in Widow's Hollow. Knees weak. Heart rattling in my chest like it wanted out. That grave. That camera. Those photos of me. And then, the footsteps. I turned around slowly, a flashlight beam shaking in my hand. And I saw him. The man from the window. But he wasn't a ghost. He was real.
Tall.
Dressed in a black, hooded robe with a high collar that shimmered slightly in the dying light, like silk soaked in ink. His skin was pale, grayish, almost stretched tight over high cheekbones. His eyes. Lord help me.
His eyes.
They weren't just black. They were empty, like someone had scooped out the light and left behind glass and darkness. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stood, until he spoke. You were never meant to live. His voice was low, hollow, like he wasn't using vocal cords but memory itself. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen in place, like the dirt itself was holding me still. You were spared, he said, tilting his head. But you looked back. And now, the deal is broken. My lips trembled. What deal? Who are you? He stepped closer. You remember Reverend Vale? He asked, voice now a whisper I felt in my chest.
He made a vow.
In 1959. One life spared, in exchange for silence. One bride left unclaimed, so the others could vanish without resistance. He raised his hand, long fingers pointing at the grave. Your Thomas interrupted the ritual, and he paid the price. My knees buckled. I dropped to the ground. What ritual? What do you want from me? He crouched down, face inches from mine. I could smell something then, charred wood and lavender, like burnt memories. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he reached into his robe and pulled out something that made my stomach drop. A small gold locket. I recognized it. It was mine. My mother gave it to me when I turned 15. I lost it a few days before the wedding, thought it had slipped down a drain. He pressed it into my palm. You were never lost. You were marked. Then he stood. And just before he vanished into the woods, his last words echoed through the trees. The next bride dies at dusk. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember how I got my muddy shoes off or how the lights got turned back on. But I remember the locket. I remember the cold metal burning against my skin like it had been buried in snow. Inside was a photo of my mother and me, except in this version, my mother's face was missing. Just blurred out, like it had been erased from existence. I stayed awake all night, watching the window, listening for that knock again. And just as the sun began to rise, I got a message, slipped under my door. No return address. No footsteps on the porch. Just a torn piece of paper. 3 words, scribbled in blood-colored ink. The bride knows. Sweetheart, I know this sounds impossible, but something is happening. Something bigger than me. Bigger than Thomas. Bigger than any town rumor or ghost story you've ever heard. Because this morning Marissa called me, sobbing. She said her best friend just vanished. 2 days before her wedding. And they found her bridal veil, wrapped in lavender. After that last message, the bride knows. Marissa came back to Dutch Hollow the very next morning. She hadn't slept. Her hands were shaking when she walked in, and her voice was ragged from crying. Eleanor, she said, my best friend Kendra disappeared last night. 2 days before her wedding. Her veil was folded on her pillow, tied with lavender, and her front door was unlocked. There was no sign of struggle. No phone. No footprints. But there was something else. Before she vanished, Marissa said, Kendra sent me a picture. A symbol she found scratched into her back porch. She showed me the photo, and my blood ran cold. It was the same symbol Thomas had drawn in his journal back in 1961. A circle within a triangle with 3 vertical slashes through the center. I had seen that symbol once before, etched into the stone behind Widow's Hollow, where the orchard met the old well. And I remember Thomas's last letter, the one he wrote weeks before he died. He said, if it returns, it will return through the trees. The altar is still out there, beneath the ash roots, beneath the listening earth. We had no time to waste. We packed flashlights, gloves, salt, matches, and a box of old church relics I'd kept locked in a drawer since 1965. Blessed crosses, a vial of holy water, a silver pocket Bible. It was nearly dusk when we reached the woods. But this time, we didn't go to the cabin. We followed the symbols. They were carved into tree bark, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Faint markings that shimmered when the light caught them just right. Circles, slashes, triangles, arrows pointing deeper into the forest. The farther we went, the colder the air became. We passed birds frozen on branches. Squirrels lying still on the path, untouched but unmoving. Nature itself was pausing, as if it didn't want to see what came next. And then we found it. A clearing, buried in the center of the woods.
Silent.
Empty. And wrong. At first glance, it looked like nothing. But then the wind shifted, and we saw the altar. It was built from black stone, buried halfway beneath twisted ash roots. The surface was stained dark and not with moss or time. There were wedding veils nailed to the trees around it, some old and yellowed, others newer. One still had a makeup smudge on it. Another was torn down the center, as if someone had tried to run. And in the middle of the altar, a small bride doll, hand-stitched, wearing a red veil. It was placed inside a rusted metal bowl, surrounded by dried lavender and 3 finger bones.
We didn't speak.
We didn't move. We barely breathed. Then Marissa gasped. On the altar, scratched into the stone, was Kendra's name. And beneath it, to be taken. I reached for the holy water and sprinkled it across the stone. The wind screamed, like it came alive, howling through the trees in a circle around us. The veils flapped violently. The doll twitched in the bowl. Then the ground beneath the altar cracked, split wide open. And, from inside the earth, we saw something move. Something long.
And gray.
A hand. No skin. No nails. Just bone and blackened sinew. It reached out slowly, dragging the rest of the figure behind it. It wasn't fully human.
Tall.
Slender. Its robe seemed sewn to its flesh. Its mouth was wide, filled with rows of teeth that didn't stop. And in place of eyes were deep, empty sockets that leaked ash. We froze. But it didn't come toward us. It stood beside the altar and spoke. In a voice not from this world. She is not yet yours. The bride's blood must be given freely. The vow must be renewed, or the town will burn. Then it looked directly at me. You broke the chain, Eleanor Whitlock. And just like that, it vanished into the ground, leaving behind a scorched mark in the shape of that cursed symbol. We ran. We didn't speak until we reached my car. But before we could leave the woods, Marissa grabbed my arm. Her eyes were wide, pale, almost lifeless. Eleanor, she whispered, look at your hands.
I did.
And that's when I saw it. The symbol, branded into my skin. 3 slashes across a circle. Burned there like it had always belonged. Sweetheart, please comment.
Please subscribe.
I don't know what's happening to me. But I think whatever that thing was, it marked me again. And this time, it's not going to wait 60 years. Because last night, I heard my mama's voice calling me from the porch. But my mama's been dead since 1989. I opened the door. I shouldn't have, I know that now. But when you hear your mama's voice, soft, warm, calling you by your childhood nickname, Ellie girl, you don't think. You just move. It was just after 3 a.m. The air was heavy with that thick, pre-storm stillness. And there, standing on my porch in the moonlight, was a woman. She wore a blue dress. The same one Mama was buried in. Her hair was in a loose bun just like Mama used to wear it when she made Sunday bread. But her skin was too smooth. Her eyes were too wide. And her smile never moved. Not even a twitch. Ellie girl, she said again. You left the door open too long. The wind will bring them in. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. But then I looked closer, at her neck. There was a seam. A stitched seam, running from just beneath her left ear down to her collarbone. I whispered, You're not my mother. She tilted her head. The motion was stiff, inhuman, like a puppet being turned too far on its string. Then she said something I haven't told anyone until now. He told me to deliver the final veil. She raised her hand. Inside was a bridal veil. Not just any veil. My veil. The same one that reappeared weeks ago. But now it was soaked in something thick and dark. Blood or something worse. And that's when I heard it scratching. Coming from under the porch floorboards. From inside the walls. From beneath the floorboards of my own home. And then a knock on the back door. Another. And another. 3 knocks. Always 3. Always at once. I slammed the front door shut, locked it, and backed away. The woman didn't move. She just stood there, staring through the glass, holding the veil like it was part of me she meant to return. Then came the whispers. From the walls. The ceiling. Bride of the broken vow. Eleanor must kneel. Eleanor must kneel. I ran to the living room, grabbed the box of relics again, and threw the entire bottle of holy water at the front door. The woman vanished in a blink, like smoke pulled backward. The veil dropped to the floor. But it didn't vanish. It stayed. Still wet. Still real. Still warm. I didn't sleep. I waited until dawn and called Marissa. She didn't answer. I called again. No reply. So, I drove to her hotel, just past the edge of town. Room 6B. But the bed was still made. The mirror was shattered. And on the bathroom wall, written in something that smeared like rust and glue, the vow cannot be undone. And beneath that, the next bride dies on Hallows Eve. I looked at my phone. October 28th. 3 days. I went to the desk clerk, asked when she last saw Marissa. She said she checked out that morning, but left behind a package for me, wrapped in brown paper. No name. Just one word scrawled across the top. Watch. Inside, an old mini-DV tape, labeled, Thomas. October 13th, 1995. Confession. I haven't watched it yet, because I don't have the machine. But I know what I'm going to do. Tonight, I'm going back to the altar in the woods. Because I think he's waiting for me. And I think the ritual isn't over. Not until someone finishes what Reverend Vale started. Not until someone, me, kneels. Sweetheart, please subscribe, comment, and tell me what you would do. I'm afraid to go alone, but I think it has to be me. Because if I don't, someone else will take my place. Maybe Marissa. Maybe someone else's daughter. Tonight I went back. To the altar. To the place where Thomas ran, where the brides vanished, where the veil first bled. I brought a box of relics. I brought the locket. I brought the veil. And I brought a single match. Because if it came to it, I was ready to burn that cursed clearing to ash. The wind was already moving strangely when I stepped into the woods. It didn't blow. It circled. Around me. Like it knew I was coming. Like it had been waiting. The trees groaned, but no branches snapped. The air smelled like iron and lavender. And then the whispers began. Dozens of voices.
Soft. Sad.
Pleading. Ellie, Ellie girl. Some were familiar. Some were brides I never met. Some were children. But they all whispered the same thing. Don't kneel. When I reached the altar, it was already lit. Candles I hadn't placed were flickering around it, their flames a deep, unnatural blue. The veils were still there, fluttering like shrouds in a storm that hadn't yet come. And on the stone, it was the doll. But this time, it wore my face. Sewn crudely, but unmistakably, gray thread for my hair, dark beads for my eyes, and a twisted line of stitches curving into a smile that wasn't mine. It was a miniature of my wedding veil. And around its neck, my locket. The real one. I know I had it in my coat pocket. I reached for it.
Gone.
Somehow, it had been taken. Without touch. Without noise. And then the figure appeared. Same as before. Robes like midnight. Skin pale and tight. Empty black sockets where eyes should be. But this time he knelt. Right beside the altar. And he spoke. The vow is broken by love. It can only be sealed by blood. He extended a hand toward me. Inside it was a rusted knife. I shook my head. I won't offer blood to a curse. I won't finish what Vale started.
He didn't blink.
He just whispered. Then someone else must. The altar rumbled. The earth cracked beneath it again. But this time it wasn't a hand that rose. It was a face. Marissa's. Eyes wide. Mouth sewn shut. Hands clawing at the edges of the soil.
Alive. Trapped.
I screamed her name. Ran toward her. Tried to dig, but the roots coiled like snakes, pulling her back inch by inch. And over the wind, over the thunder, over the weeping of the trees, I heard him say, "She went to your place. She wore the veil. The offering was accepted." "No," I sobbed. "She didn't choose this."
She did, he replied.
"She said your name at the altar. She begged to take your place." I fell to my knees. And that's when he leaned close, so close I could smell his breath, like wet dirt and dying flowers. He whispered, "But there must always be a bride. 3 days from now, another will be chosen." And he handed me something wrapped in silk. A list. 30 names. All women. All engaged. All from towns within 100 miles. And at the bottom, a line left blank. One final space. And beneath it, November 1st, final offering. Sweetheart, I know what this means. I know what I have to do. But if the names are real, if these women are alive, maybe I can warn them. Maybe I can stop this. Maybe it ends with me. But then something happened tonight, something I haven't told you yet. When I got home, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside, a photograph of my granddaughter, wearing a white dress. After I saw the photograph, my granddaughter, Eva, in a white dress, I didn't wait. I packed a bag, left the porch light on, and drove through the dark like a thread pulling itself through the final stitch. It was just after midnight when I reached the woods. The veil in one hand, the list of names in the other, and tucked in my coat pocket, Eva's favorite blue ribbon. I followed the wind this time. Didn't need symbols. Didn't need whispers. The trees opened for me like they'd been expecting this ending. The clearing pulsed with energy I could feel in my bones. The altar was lit. The veils were all there, fluttering like ghosts taking one last breath. And standing at the center was him, the man in the robe, the hollow-eyed figure. He didn't speak this time, because I did. "I know the rules," I said. "A bride for silence. A vow made in fear. A curse fed by grief. But it ends now." I stepped forward. "Hold the veil," to my chest. "Take me," I whispered. "Take only me. Let the girls go. Let Eva go." His head tilted. The earth shuddered. And then he nodded. "Just once. That's all." The altar opened, not cracked, not torn. Opened, like a mouth sighing its last word. I stepped onto it. It was warm, familiar, like walking into the childhood room of a memory that never belonged to you. I lay the veil down. I closed my eyes, clutched Eva's ribbon to my heart, and whispered the last thing I ever wanted to say. I kneel willingly. Everything went dark, but I didn't die. I woke up. In the woods. Sunlight on my face. Altar, gone.
Veils, gone.
Symbol, burned out. My coat was still on me. The ribbon is still tucked inside.
But the list?
Blank. Every name vanished, including mine. And beside me, resting on the forest floor, was a white rose.
Still dewy.
Still alive. And beneath it, written in the dirt with a single finger, "Debt paid." The door is closed. I limped back through the woods. My body is old. My bones are aching, but lighter.
Somehow.
As if something had been carried for me. When I returned to town, I called Eva. She was safe. Laughing. Hadn't worn the dress after all. Said something told her not to.
She didn't know why.
I smiled. I knew why. It's been weeks now. The whispers are gone. The wind is just wind. And I can sit on the porch again without looking over my shoulder. But I still wear the locket. Not as a chain. As a memory. Of love. Of sacrifice. Of choosing the light when the dark begged louder. So to anyone out there listening, if you've carried something in silence, something old and sharp and shadowed, you can end it. You can name it. You can walk into the woods and walk back out whole. You are not the curse. You are the key. Please like, comment, subscribe, and pass this on to someone still carrying something unspoken. Let them know they don't have to kneel to it anymore. Because this story is finished now.
The door is closed.
And somewhere deep in the trees, the altar is ashes. And Ellie is free. You're still here. That means something. You've sat with me through the storm, through shadows and silence, and stories most people wouldn't dare say out loud. I don't take that lightly. Some stories are like seeds. We bury them deep, hoping they'll never bloom. We pack them under years of living, of pretending, of smiling in photographs and folding the pain into linen drawers. But the soil remembers. And one day, without asking, it starts to grow. That's what this was. A bloom I never wanted to see again. Why now, after all these years? Because the air changed. Because the wind began to whisper again. Because silence, for all its safety, eventually starts to rot. And because there's a girl out there, maybe you, watching this on a quiet night, wondering if what happened to you matters. It does, sweetheart. Your pain echoes. Not just in suffering but in survival. You made it through. That matters. You are not the broken pieces. You are the hands that gathered them. And if no one ever told you this before, you didn't deserve what happened to you. But you deserve what happens next. This story was never just mine. It was stitched from the voices of the missing, the silenced, the ones who knelt because they thought they had no choice. I tell it now so that my granddaughter won't inherit it as a curse, but as a choice. A closed door, and a lit path beyond it. If anything I said sat gently in your chest, if it shook something loose, or made you feel a little less alone, please leave a comment. I'll read every one. If it helped you, or made you remember, or made you hope, I ask with a quiet heart, like, subscribe, share this with someone who needs it. Let these echoes reach farther than the woods ever could. As for me, Eleanor May Whitlock is a name that held a lot of sorrow. So, if it's all right with you, I think I'll set her down gently now. Call me Ellie again. Just Ellie. The name Mama used on better days. And with that, I'll close the door. But this time, not out of fear. Out of peace. Because sometimes, even the oldest houses can breathe again. Good night, sweetheart. Until we meet again. Somewhere gentler. Ellie.